step outside and there were another half a dozen kids waiting to do something. It was a beautiful childhood. This became his life. I've said it. Hitler made a real Jew out of my husband. I can't be remembered for one thing or another. I'm just Anita. My name is Anita Marie Emmerich Hyman, and I was born in 1917, May 13, in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Bethesda Hospital. And one of my earliest memories, I suppose, are playing with my older sisters, Mary and Catherine, and having them read wonderful stories to me. And then I was learning to read with having had their help. And I guess those were and my mother being around, of course, also, but reading stories and sometimes scary stories, like Little Red Riding Hood was a very scary story. My mother's parents, my mother was born in North Vernon, Indiana, but she was born in North Indiana even though the parents lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, but the father, my grandfather, her father, was with the Southern Ohio Railway, and the railroad tracks were being laid over in that section, so temporarily they were living in Indiana, and he was a paymaster on the railroad. And that's why she was born over there. My father's family were Berliners, Germany, and he came as an 18-year-old to the United States by himself. I think he may have come by himself or with a sister who was just slightly his age or a little bit younger, and lived in New Jersey for a short time, and then he, having heard that there's German spoken, a lot of Germans in Cincinnati, he came to Cincinnati. And that's where he met my mother. I only knew I had grandparents, but I didn't meet them. They were gone. The grandfather, my mother's father, may have been alive when I was an infant. I think he may have died when I was a very young baby. But I didn't know any grandparents. I wasn't lucky enough to have grandparents that I knew. I heard stories about them, and they were exciting and wonderful stories because they were the parents of 14 children. My mother was the youngest of that 14. My grandparents came from Ireland, and they came by way of Canada, and they lived in a place called Hamilton, Ontario, for a short time until they migrated to the United States. And they established residence in Walnut Hills. They had a home on Fairfax Avenue. And when the oldest child of that 14, when she was married, she bought a house right next door to her parents. My mother was born after this oldest sister had a large number of children, and my mother would go next door to play with those kids next door who were her uncles and aunts when she was a baby, a toddler. She grew up calling her own mother Grandma because that's what all these other little kids were calling that lady. And it was humorous when I'd hear that story. That was a very humorous story. I don't know too much about my grandmother other than she was a good cook, and she was a busy lady in the kitchen with all those children. My grandfather, I think he was a widower for quite a few years. He lived to be 96, And there's a park on Madison Road, which backs into Fairfax Avenue, called Owl's Nest Park. And he used to walk to that park and through that park every day. And when I pass there, drive down Madison Road, I can almost see him walking and sitting in the park because I've heard so much about it when I was a child. He was he must have been an interesting man with a cute Irish sense of humor. And I wish I had known him, but and my older sisters knew a little, remembered him a little, but they were pretty young when he died also. So we weren't lucky enough to, to know grandparents or to have. I didn't know any, but my sisters told me a lot about him, just the one grandparent. And the ones in Germany, I never knew at all. And I don't know any of that family. I met one cousin who, when I was in Berlin, I met that young man. He's a young man my age. The story I heard from my mother was that she was coming out of, there used to be at 5th and Walnut, a Dow's drugstore. And after she came from her business school, she went into whatever, have a Coca-Cola, whatever, and it was raining outside. And when she came out of the store, and a gentleman approached her to ask if he could help her across the street with use of his umbrella, and that turned out to be her husband. Eventually, they walked across the street to the bus, and he saw her on the bus, and I guess he had her phone number, her address. I don't know what, but anyway, they met again and again. And when she had the nerve, I guess, to invite him to her house, I don't know, but they eventually married, and they were married at a church on Gilbert Avenue. The name of it I can't remember right now. Anyway, they eventually, I don't know how long that took, but they were married not too long, I suppose, after that meeting. Neither one of them were very young. My mother, I think, might have been a couple years older. A beautiful woman, very pretty woman. And he was a handsome man, but unfortunately, it didn't last. It wasn't a good marriage. My father was born in Germany, in Berlin, Germany. How many brothers and sisters, I'm not certain. I think 2 brothers and a sister. Came to the United States alone, without his family, when he was about 18 years old. And he lived a short time in New Jersey and then came to Cincinnati, having heard that there was a large German community in Cincinnati. And that's where he met my mother. He was tall, 6 feet tall, a good-looking man with, I didn't know him with his full head of hair. He had a receding hairline when I knew him. But I think that he was a very bright, intelligent person. And how much education? He went through what they call the gymnasium in Germany, like college or pre-college, I don't know just how far, but he was educated. The family was well-educated people, and they were successful business people in what was then, in German, I don't know how you say it, but beer gardens. They had these fantastic, I have pictures of them, restaurants, beautiful places where music and beer and happy things, weddings took place and so forth. Apparently it wasn't enough for him because he left it and came to the United States to explore. And he did explore, and he went to California. And from one thing to another, I don't know just how many different businesses, but eventually into real estate, and was quite successful until the Big Depression of '32 hit him like it hit so many other people. And he lost almost everything. And he died of pneumonia in California. And as was his wish, he was cremated. He gave, actually what he did, he gave his body, or he wished for his body to be used for medical purposes. And that's what happened. And then I assume that what they do with what's left, it was cremated. My mother was, what my memory of my mother is, a beautiful woman, small, beautiful hair, and a pretty skin, beautiful skin, no makeup as far as when her daughters were older, they coaxed her into putting on a little lipstick, but other than that, she was beautiful without any makeup. She had not an easy life. She was raising children without a father around very often, very much, and but she was always happy and a good homemaker and a good cook and a sweet person, and she lived to be 102 years old. I think on the verge of 102. In fact, we call it in Hebrew, Yartzeit, the anniversary of her death. It'll be coming up shortly. And everyone who knew her admired her and loved her, and she was a wonderful, sweet, good mother. The sisters I knew were Mary and Catherine, Catherine and Mary, Catherine being the elder. And the one who died before I was born, died as a baby, was Julianne. And Mary and Catherine were like, maybe almost like two other mothers to me, being 9 years old and 10 years old when I was born. And they were, there to correct me, take care of me when my mother wasn't with me, and spank me when I needed it. And but always, I knew I could count on them to be helpful. And they took me to school because they were in the same building where I was in school, but they were in the high school department, and so they were always there. And there are some funny stories that pertain to experiences around the school and going to school, coming from school, with them accepting, assuming the responsibility as a serious caretaker of their little sister. This house, 1369 Chapel Street, where I lived and grew up until I was about, I think it must have been a little 10 or a little past 10, when the street was put through. The house had to be torn down by order of the city. It was a simple house with a front porch, where people gathered on the front porch. There was an upstairs where another family lived, people named Mess, and they had 2 boys. And our apartment on the house on the first floor was very simple. I think 2 bedrooms in a big room, like a kitchen, everything room. Great room, they call it today. And another small room. A big, well, it was set way back from the street, a long driveway. And a lot of trees, which I liked to climb. And I was always up in the trees. And other children who lived in the neighborhood were there playing in this big, like the woods. It was like the woods. And on Chapel Street, there was a big house, a beautiful, very pretty houses. All the families knew one another. And at the end of our driveway was where the streetcar stopped on the Chapel Street. And there was a big box with a tin lid, and it was called a sandbox. And they shoveled the sand out of there when it was snowing to keep the snow off of the railroad track, or the streetcar track. And the kids used to sit on top of the sandbox and wait for the streetcar, or wait for somebody to come home on the streetcar. And that's an early recollection. Another house on the other side of our driveway that faced on Chapel Street was a boarding house, a very pretty house. I can't remember the lady's name right now, but she was known by everybody, and she ran this lovely, like a little hotel. I think they were mostly senior citizens. And when my sisters were old enough, they would help. This lady would hire them to help, like kids do today, serve or whatever they did over there, help her with things that had to be done. And they earned a little money that way. We were always outdoors, first of all, because there was such wonderful, just free play. There was nothing organized. The children who lived on Myrtle Avenue, which paralleled Chapel Street, came over to play because we had this big, all the trees and all the things to play with, and we kicked ball. We had jumping rope. The girls played jump rope. We played marbles. Had bags of marbles. We had jacks. The girls played jacks more. The boys played marbles. We played hide and seek. You don't see kids playing these games today, but we were busy all the time. And dolls, of course, were a very important part of my life, because I had a very special Aunt Jewel who was always buying me and spoiling me. She was a single sister of my mother, and she worked for a physician on Woodburn Avenue near Chapel Street, Dr. Ramsey, and she was his receptionist, I guess she was. And her day was Wednesday, and she would take me in the afternoon, and we would go to the Orpheum Theater and Grater's for ice cream. And then in Grater's, at that time, they sold little toy kind of things for kids, little glass trains, wagons filled with colored candies. And I came home with one of those every time, and then we'd stop in a little jewelry store, and she would buy me fancy things, and she was the one who spoiled me. But playing was, no one was ever bored. What are we going to do now, Mama? I mean, nobody had to ask, what are we going to do? Because you step outside and there were another half a dozen kids waiting to do something. It was a beautiful childhood. 2 of my close friends who lived in the Del Monte apartments on Myrtle were the Gustin children, Gustin. And there was Billy Gustin and his sister Marilyn. And Billy was closer to my age. She was a little bit younger. And they went to Hoffman School. And when we were old enough to have a box camera for $2.98, we would walk from Chapel Street, Myrtle Avenue, to Salutaris or Ingleside. On Sunday, that was off of McMillan Street, if you know, overlooking the river. We take our box camera and walk there and take pictures. That was the exciting thing to do. And I think we couldn't have been, we were 8, 9 years old. And it was perfectly safe. Nobody questioned where, you know, that you couldn't do that. And we'd sit on a bench and look at the river, look across the river, and take pictures, watch the boats go down the river with a Coney Island boat. And that was a thing that the Sunday afternoon kind of a thing that you would do. One time I remember going to Chicago after I had been to Girl Scout camp. So it was after I was 10 years old. And I met, I knew that my counselor, Elsa Wiesenthal, was my counselor, and she lived in Chicago. Or she lived and worked in Chicago. She was a young college girl, I suppose. And I called her where she was working in a department store, and she invited me to come to lunch with her. And I took a streetcar in from way out in the suburbs somewhere of North Chicago, and rode into Chicago and got back by myself. And I was so proud of that. This was Elsa Wiesenthal, and that was one. And of course, my cousins were all older. I was like the little shrimp of the whole crew, and so they didn't pay too much attention to me. They were older and had their things to do. My Uncle Tom was inspector for a meat inspector at the slaughterhouse, I guess, whatever, slaughterhouse, or one of those pecans, or, well, I don't know what they were, but that was his big claim to fame. And the other boys in the family were more my sister's age. And there was one daughter, there was a cousin who was fairly close to my age, a little older, and I got to know her better when I was older than the 10 on one of the, and they would come to Cincinnati, and we have pictures of them taken at Eden Park. That's where people went to have pictures taken. And they were all lined up on a bench overlooking the river. My early days, I went where I was very young to it was like a nursery school at the St. Ursula Convent, on McMillan Street. It's still there, and it's a very fine school. They have a very good reputation, high school education now even. But then those nuns taught at St. Francis de Sales School, where I went to school. And my first day at school experience was we were lined up in desks kids today wouldn't know what that's all about, but you were in rows, and you each had your own little desk with an inkwell and an attached seat to the desk. And I recall Sister Ursula, I believe, was the first grade teacher. A little bit of a thing and not a very pretty face. And I spoke to the kid across the aisle, said something, whatever, and she came with a ruler and slapped me on the hand. And you don't talk in school. You have to raise your hand if you have something to say. And I didn't like her from then on, and I still think she was wrong. But other than that one teacher, they were all wonderful, sweet, helpful. And I think it was the first grade. I guess I wasn't too happy in there. And a kid in the class told me, you know what? When they line you up and they take you to the bathroom midway through the day, and this girl said, my grandma's at my house, and she came, she's going to be baking cookies all day, and it's going to be really wonderful at my house. And when we go to the bathroom, put your feet up on the seat, and nobody will know there's somebody in there. And when everybody gets out of the bathroom, we'll run out the back door to my house. And her house was just like on the next street of joining the school grounds. That's what I did. And of course, after school, my sisters came down to pick me up from the class, from upstairs where they were in class, 8th and 9th grade, something like that. And I wasn't there. And apparently nobody had even missed me until that point. And of course, I won't say what, it broke loose. And then they realized, well, 2 of us were missing from that class. I wasn't at my house. And so they checked with the other girl's house, and there they found me eating cookies. And my one sister came over. I guess they both came, but I remember my eldest sister, Kay, who later, Catherine, became Kay. And all the way home, she tried to spank me. I'd get 10 steps ahead of her, and she'd catch up and give me another swat. And trying to impress upon me what I did was very wrong. And I'll never forget that. Of course, school was, recess time was great. It's jumping rope, again, double dutch, and I was really good at double dutch. And the Girl Scout meetings took place at school, and I became a Girl Scout when I was old enough, I guess 10, I'm not sure what. Oh, we didn't have brownies then. I think you went right into Girl Scouts. And Miss Sipple, who was a Girl Scout troop leader, and she lived in Westwood. And she was a lovely woman and a very, very dedicated to helping kids and to working with the Girl Scouts. And it was fairly new then. There weren't a lot, but I went to Girl Scout camp, and it was over in Indiana, just over the line, and I think it was $14 a week. And it was wonderful. We slept in tents, and very rugged, and I loved it. And I met different kids from all different parts of the city, and we saw each other as often as we could, but we mainly looked forward to the next year at camp. And we had Girl Scout meetings, and we were divided into little, I don't know what they called them, sections, I don't know. And I was in charge of one section, and of course that meant that you were very good. And we learned, I collected, what would they call them? On your sleeve you got awards for every, you did so many knots, you learned all the knots and learned all the different things, and you passed the test, and you got a seal or a patch, was it? I don't know. Anyway, I was very big at that, and I went from up the ladder, until I became a first-class scout. And I took it very seriously until I got to high school, and then I wasn't too active in scouting anymore. At camp, first of all, it was my first experience. Camping was my first experience of sleeping in a tent and being with so many kids, sleepovers. And the counselors, as I said, I had this wonderful girl who came from Chicago, Elsa Wiesenthal, and she charmed me. She was such a sweet, helpful girl. And swimming was a big thing for me. I enjoyed that. And the hiking and carving and knotting, making knots and learning names of flower, of plants, of wild things, of just living outdoors, it appealed to me greatly. Oh, and we went horseback riding on some farm nearby, just rugged through the hills, and it was a very well run camp, and it impressed me very much, and I guess it had a lot to do with my, love of the outdoors. Even, well, I was still, where I lived, I grew up outdoors a lot, so that I liked it very much. When I was a teenager, early teenager, we were in California, and for a second try at my parents being together, and it didn't seem to work. We were living in a lovely place. We had a wonderful dog named Molly, an Irish setter dog, who wandered away one day and fell in a tar pit. The tar pit in it was Hollywood, near Westwood, and the La Brea Tar Pits, it's called. Now it's a park. At that time, it was just a big empty place, and the dog wandered in there, and she had to be gotten out with big boards and shaved, and it was a pitiful thing, but she did regain her fur and after a long period of recovery. But around that time is when I didn't know too much about what was going on, but they settled they had some kind of a court settlement, my parents, and it was inevitable because it wasn't working, and it hadn't worked through all the years. And but my sister Mary stayed out there with my father, and they seemed to hit it off very well. In fact, my father was quite successful in real estate, and at one point there was an article in the paper, in the Hollywood News, sort of a gossip column that a woman wrote, and something about seeing Max Emmerich and his beautiful daughter Mary crossing at Vine and Hollywood Boulevard, and so he made a name for himself. And the only one time that I felt anything that I was outstanding about spending time together was one day he took me to a jewelry store on Hollywood Boulevard and bought me a gorgeous bracelet, and I still have the bracelet, and it was, a nice experience. It was my 13th birthday, and as I say, there was no knowledge of him other than I remember being at his office in the Guarantee Bank building on Hollywood Boulevard, 6331 Hollywood Boulevard, and when we recently, a few years ago, we were out there, walked past this place, and those were fleeting memories. When living in California, in Hollywood actually, I went to Bancroft Junior High School, Bancroft, and I enjoyed that very much, and I was active as a newcomer can be in a class, and there was a handsome boy who I liked very much, Winston Whitmire, and we wrote to each other for a while after I left there and came back. The school was located, Harold Lloyd Movie Studio was on the same street, and we kids after school would wander up past to see what was going on at Harold Lloyd's movies, and there were interesting things. Some of the two people who lived on my street, we'd walk home together and have interesting times. And a girl I met in the class, we became close, Barbara Clark, and she used to like to to bake cookies, and she liked to make candy, and she gave me a recipe for caramels, and I did that for years. And it was a nice experience, but I came back to Cincinnati, and that's when I went to Withrow. I went to Withrow High School then as a freshman. Well, of course, kids don't, feel it like, but that things aren't great. During the slump in business and real estate business, of course, there were ups and downs, and that was my father's business. Buildings, big buildings that he owned or had an interest in, up near the Hollywood Bowl. In that area, and I remember driving past that. Well, we lost that one today. Well, we lost that one yesterday. And things weren't so good. And yes, in our own house, it was like a tag sale or an auction. I don't know what they call it, but people were coming in. They decided to sell this piece. It was a good antique. It was a lot of money, and. I knew what things weren't good, but how serious do young kids at that age, absorb it all? And but I suppose that that situation added to whatever difficulties the parents were having. It just didn't make it any better. And but in between, we had pretty trips up in the mountains and to Grand Canyon and pretty out to Pasadena. I remember going to wonderful places and restaurants and all of it. But that too shall come to pass. Everything, it doesn't last forever. When I returned from California, I went to high school as a freshman at Withrow, and we had found an apartment on Kleinview Avenue off of Madison Road in Walnut Hills, and I took the streetcar to school, and I became very fond of the counselor, Rose Agater, who seemed to take a liking to me, and she had one of her a woman who had already graduated from Withrow, was in charge of the modeling fashion shows at Mabley and Carew, which was a fine store in Cincinnati, and the fashion shows were held at the Netherland Plaza on Saturday luncheon, and Miss Agater, Rose Agater, insisted that I go down and try out because this girl that was in charge, thought that she would like me. And I got the job, and I went and whenever they had a fashion show, which was almost every week at lunchtime, and I would model clothes, and I was quite impressed with that job, and I made a little money. And then I had other favorite teachers. The English teacher was a wonderful woman, and all of them were great. And a couple of the students, the principal was Walter Peoples, and his daughter was a classmate of mine. And the math teacher also had a daughter in my class, and so it turned out to be a cozy situation. And then I was rushed for altruist sorority, and I joined, and that was a nice experience of making friends in a new situation, and it was a very pleasant. And I graduated in 1936 from Withrow and went on into nursing school. An interesting experience at the high school level. there was a career day in our senior year, and to learn about the different careers that are available. And one of them was nursing. And I said to a friend of mine, well, I've already decided, I decided years ago that I'm going to be a nurse, so why do I have to go to listen to that? But here's something, aviation. And I thought, now that sounds like something I don't know anything about, but I'd like to know more about. So I went to that class, and in that class was the woman who was conducting it was an aviatrix who had her own plane in Cincinnati at Lunken Airport. And she lived practically across the street from Withrow at the corner of Observatory and Madison Road. Her parents were in the Lackner, Edith Lackner. And she had her plane, and she invited, after her big spiel about aviation, she invited us to come on the next Saturday to Lunken Airport and go up for a plane ride. And I signed up, and I got a friend of mine to sign up, and we did without telling anybody. And it was a great experience. Of course, I couldn't afford to take flying lessons. It was very expensive, but it was fun. At Withrow, there was a riding club, and I was, ever since I guess it was when I was at Girl Scout camp, I became interested in horses, and so I joined the riding club. And we used to ride horses at Aracoma Riding Club, which was on Section Road in Amberley Village, which is Aracoma Forest, the development of houses now. But at that time there was a big frame house on the Section Road, and all that land behind there was the Aracoma riding stables. And that's where we went once a week to ride, and rode all through the hills of that area. And I liked it. I loved it much, but it was an expensive thing to do. But whenever I could, then I met a young man, Charlie Roth, who was also interested. He wasn't in high school; he had already graduated, and he was in architecture. And so we would ride together very often, and he wrote English very, very well. But we became serious to an extent, but not serious enough to pursue marriage or anything. But we went together for a long time, until I was in nursing school, and I saw him even then, but that tapered off. After graduation from Withrow, I enrolled at the Jewish Hospital nursing school. Interestingly enough, the school was recommended to me by my physician, Dr. Paul DeCourcy, who was on the staff of the Good Samaritan Hospital. But he said the best school is the Jewish Hospital School. So I took his advice, and I went to that school, which was an excellent school. There were 68 members in our entering class. Many of them came from Hughes High School. 2 or 3 came from the old Woodward High School downtown, and I had close relationships. One of my classmates called me just a couple days ago with all those people, and I was president of the class, and it was a wonderful experience. We worked very hard, long hours. Nobody in nursing today would believe all the things that went on in those years. There was a time in nursing school where you go from being on probation to prove yourself through the class part of it, and you go into to a upper class. You're a probationer, and then you're there was a term for it. Anyway, you changed uniforms. As a probationer, you wore a pink under the apron. You were a pinky they call them. And then you went into the white uniform as an upperclassman. And in the classes that preceded us, they had received capes, navy blue, beautiful woolen capes that they used to go out onto the street, and we did, many of our classes were held at what was then the General Hospital, now the University Hospital, and the Children's Hospital, which was a few blocks away from our hospital. So you were outdoors, you wore a cover, in weather you had to have covering, and this was what the cape supplied, and that was supplied by the hospital. And it was, I thought, I was a class president, and I thought that we were entitled to that, and that was the year they stopped giving the capes. And I organized a group of petitioners, and we wrote letters to the board of directors. I knew that if we had gone to the head nurse, the chief of our school, she wouldn't have taken it on any farther, and I knew she didn't have the decision to make. But the board of directors, they supplied the money. I thought they should know this, and of course they turned it right over to Mary Cutler, who was our director of nursing school, and she did nothing about it. They weren't interested in changing the law, which was already made, but we raised we raised a lot of trouble, and our voices were heard vehemently, but it did no good. And so that was, but there were other times when we had run-ins, so to speak, with the directors, and our class was a large group. As I say, 68 people entered the class, but not that many graduated and went on to pursue. Some were married, and you weren't allowed to be married while you were a student. Today that's different. This Mary Cutler, who was the director of the nursing school, she was an excellent director. I mean, she was but very set in her ways and very conservative, I guess. And she called when she called me into the office to say that we are not getting the capes, and that settles that. And you're you have these Bolshevik tendencies, and you better quiet down. So I was called on the carpet. I was, I think, assistant nurse in one of the departments, the floor, and it was like the charity. They don't call it that anymore, but we knew that they were charity patients, free patients on that particular ward, and it was right next to the emergency room, and so that very often the doctors who had patients in the emergency room or visiting, just a quick visit, would stop by my desk. And one of them was Dr. Morris Hyman, and he had a patient, Paul, I remember, the young fellow, was in for whatever it was, an ear problem, nose problem. My husband was in otolaryngology, and one of the problems of this young man was ears or nose, what I don't recall. Anyway, he kept him, I don't know, several days longer, so he could come by that department. He was the only patient, and he didn't want to let him go because he could come by to see me. And that was like the joke of the day. And I don't think it's anything to be proud of. It's funny, but it's not ethical. But at any rate, we started dating, and he met my family, and I finally met his sister, Rosalie, and her husband, and the children, and we were married. In telling the children about the times when we were dating, and I was a nurse at the hospital, and he was a physician making calls to the hospital to visit his patients. He told the children that your mom looked like a diploma because she was slender and all in white from head to toe, and that was his cute description of their mother, the diploma. The days, the evenings that I was with my husband dating, we spent a lot of time at the Netherlands, at the Pavilion Caprice, dancing, or Glenn Miller's orchestra, and all the wonderful music that came to Cincinnati at the time, orchestras. And he loved to dance, and so did I. And had dinner at wonderful restaurants in Cincinnati, and it was a wonderful time. I'm trying to remember when he first met my mother and my sister, and it must have been after we were dating for a few months, and it was a planned experience. He was a little tense about it, and I was a little tense about it, but it worked out beautifully. And they saw his beautiful smile and a very friendly, outgoing person, and full of cute little offhanded jokes and stories. And so it was very pleasant, and surprisingly so. I didn't meet his mother, but eventually I met his sister. One afternoon, I guess it was on a Thursday, his afternoon off, and we went to visit his sister, who lived in a pretty home in Bond Hill on Paddock Hills Avenue. And at that time, she had a little girl, Jackie, who was my husband's pet because he was the first child among the brothers and sisters of his period, but his older sister had already had children, but this one seemed to be his pet. And in fact, the people at Shillitoe's baby department assumed that he had a child because he was always in the baby department buying baby clothes. It was for this little niece, his sister's child. So we went to visit them, and I have pictures of the two of us standing with his sister Rosalie and the little girl Jackie, and in the front yard of their home, and somebody took pictures. I still have the pictures, and we took the child for a ride because she used to love to go in the car and go for a ride. She must have been maybe about 2 years old at the time. And I know that we recalled afterwards and always told the story as we were riding, I think in Eden Park, and this little Jackie says, "Uh-oh," and that meant she had to go toity. And we had driving around to find the toity. But that all worked out fine, but we laughed about that for many years. But it was pleasant meeting his sister. She was very sweet, and eventually she planned I suppose it was after we weren't married at that time, but afterward, after we were married, and she was the first to know, that is of her family, she planned a little reception at her home for her friends and people, an afternoon ladies' affair. And it was very pleasant meeting her lady friends, and her husband was a dentist who was a darling, sweet man, and his name was Dr. Melvin Schultz. He was from Dayton, and they were both lovely people, and they accepted me with open arms and very kind, and it was fun visiting with them. But as far as dating, the main thing that we loved to do was to with some of his friends, other doctors, and one other special friend, a man named Sam Wainton, who is living no longer, but he was a very close friend, and it was a fun time. The fact that I was not Jewish, it was frowned upon at that time. Today it's somewhat different. I'm sure the parents wanted their son to marry a nice Jewish girl, and that I wasn't. I was not that serious about the religion, although I had been educated at a Catholic school, the grade school. And my mother was serious about her religion. But she also had married out of the religion. My father was not Catholic. In those years, I guess people didn't live together like they do today. I mean, that's not frowned upon. It seems to be accepted by people. I've heard grandmothers say, "Oh, my granddaughter's living with the cutest boy," and it's just so shocking to my ears, because it was in my time it was a whole different story. However, we dated, and we managed to make love and have romantic times, but we wanted to be married. I mean, I wasn't ready to move in with somebody without being married, and so we went. He knew of a small town in Kentucky. He had patients who came from that little place, and we drove over there one night, and we had planned to go on to Louisville, and but we didn't do that. We got as far as the justice of the peace, and 1, 2, 3, we were married. I mean, it was easier than you can imagine, and that was the marriage certificate. And when we told people, we didn't tell people at all until it was in April. This was in December, and it was in April, and I had planned earlier to go to Florida. I had a new car that had been given to me by a patient, a very special patient that I was with doing private duty, and he and his family presented me with a beautiful Buick convertible, and so I took 2 or 3 of my girlfriends, and we took off for Florida in April. And I was a married woman at the time, but no, they didn't know it either. And while I was in Florida then, my husband decided to come down, and then we wrote to both of our parents. I wrote to my mother, and he wrote to his mother, who was a widow. Both mothers were widows, and we spoke to them, and I don't think anybody was really surprised. I think his mother was questioning who I am and what I am and so forth. But we spent time in Florida. Then we took a trip to Havana, Cuba, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time that we had together. It was strange because I had gone down with my friends, and they were on their own then, and but they were happy for us. My husband then, a friend, a man named Sam Wainton, was living in Florida at the time. And it was Passover time. And we went to a Seder in Miami, and it was held in a strange little restaurant in a kind of a not very attractive part of Miami at all. And but the Seder was being conducted by this rabbi, and there were a group of people, I would say maybe 50, I'm not sure, but it was a crowded kind of an unsavory kind of nothing that appealed to me, but it was what this man found. Apparently, Sam Wainton wasn't too serious about his religion, but my husband wanted to find a place to observe the holiday, the Passover. And so Sam Wainton introduced us to this rabbi, and we made an appointment after the ceremony, a couple of days later, whatever it was. We sat with him and talked to him. But prior to that, I had been reading a lot. Don't forget that I was at nursing school at a Jewish hospital, and there were 68 people in my class, and I would say a third of them, maybe, easily a third of them, were Jewish girls. And so I was very familiar with the customs and became very close to them, and I learned a lot. And even beside the girls, I had patients. It was a Jewish hospital. They were Jewish people. I knew the customs, and most of the doctors were Jewish doctors. So they were friends of mine too. So it was not all, strange. But I knew enough, and I knew what it meant to be Jewish, and so I was ready, and I thought there were many beautiful parts of it, and so he questioned me and read with me, and we studied together for I guess it must have been a couple of weeks, and so he took me to a water pool, and there he had the conversion, and I had the paper. The ceremony was performed. It was very 1, 2, 3, not a big, beautiful wedding by any means, and in there we had the conversion. So when we did come home, and I met my mother-in-law, and the paper was given to her, and she had it in her safekeeping, and she was pleased, and actually I think that she and I became very close friends, she wanted me to take her shopping all the time because I was the one that picked out pretty things for her. And so we became friends, and it was very nice. I can't say that it was a difficult transition. It was pleasant, and everybody was very sweet and welcoming. When we returned from Florida, where we were a married couple. Where were we going to live? Temporarily, we moved into the Kemper Lane Hotel, which was like an apartment hotel. Temporarily, we lived there, and we then found an apartment in Clifton on Riddle Road, 432 Riddle Road, and we were there for short 2 years, a year maybe, and maybe a year. And we then bought a house at 1142 Tawanda Terrace in Bond Hill. And the following year, on April the 9th, Judy was born, and it was a very happy occasion, of course. And Judith was named Judith Kay, the K part being after my sister, who was Kay, Aunt Kay. She was actually Catherine, but when she became a teenager, she fancied up her name to be Kay. Having a baby in 1942 was a big venture and a big change in your life, and your whole, the system is so different from today. First of all, I was in the hospital 12 days, and then when I came home from the hospital, not because I wasn't kept 12 days, but it was custom 10 days, and then for some reason I was allowed to stay 2 more days until we found the proper woman to stay with me when I got home. Coming home from the hospital, I was my room, our bedroom was on the 2nd floor. You were not allowed to walk the stairs. My husband carried me up the stairs to the 2nd floor, and I was to stay upstairs until a month, whatever. And I had a practical nurse staying to help with the baby, to help me, and somebody who did the cooking. And the procedure, I was nursing the baby, and the procedure of trying to determine if the baby was gaining weight or getting enough milk from me, you had a scale in the baby's room, a scale that was typical of what was used in a doctor's office, a pediatrician's office. And you put the baby on the scale before you took the baby to breast. And the baby nursed for a period of time, 5 minutes, whatever it was, you timed it. And off of this, from the breast, it went back on. The baby went back on the scale to see how much milk it received. If not enough, if it hadn't gained 2 ounces, I think it was 2 ounces in the beginning, then you resorted to the bottle, which was a Similac. A formula that was in the bottle. And half of the day, or half of the morning was spent preparing that formula, sterilizing the bottles, sterilizing the pots, warming the bottle. All of the procedure, the whole thing was very complicated. And looking back on it today, it seems so ridiculous. However, the part of nursing was very important, but I think that giving the formula discouraged the child from working harder, nursing from the mother, and because the milk would flow out of the nipple much faster than it would out of the mother's nipple. So it was today. It's too many babies are on, my way of thinking, are on bottles, but and not enough. But it was kind of complicated and silly, all the procedures that we went through. Judy had a personality from the word go, and she learned to speak very, very young, at a very early age, and she was the light of her daddy's eyes. I mean, he was just enthralled by that child, and so everybody else. It was Mari's baby, Mari's child, Mari's this, and everybody was she was a shining little girl, and but she didn't have long enough to be the only one. Because in a year, 13 months actually, a second child came along, but she was, since she was quite a talker from the word go, the second child had hardly a chance, because when she would open her mouth to say something, to tell what happened when they were out playing or when they came back from school, she would start to tell the story, and Judy had it told before the poor child, Susan, could even begin. Judy had dolls, and she had beautiful dolls that her Aunt Kay bought many of them, and members of the family, everybody. She had a room full of toys, of course, as she grew, she had all these beautiful collections. One incident that I recall, she had a gorgeous china-headed doll, bisque-head, very fine doll, and she had it in a carriage, a little doll carriage, and she was taking a walk around the block, and she passed a little child's house, a little boy, and he ran out and grabbed that doll out of the carriage and slammed it down on the sidewalk, and it broke her heart. It just broke her heart, and it was an outstanding occurrence. I mean, the whole thing was a unforgettable experience in her life, and she talks about it to this day. But she had I would say she loved the dolls, but she played outdoors in the swings and the slides and the equipment we had, and she had a very close playmate who was living in the house next to us, our close neighbors and close friends, and she was with Sandy, the little girl next door, until her sister became her playmate, and then eventually there was number 3. Susan arrived 13 months after Judy was born, and there was a decision. First of all, Susan had red hair, and I knew that my one niece, who was somewhat older, a few years, well, the little Jackie, who we had taken for the ride in the park, had red hair. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. She has red hair, but they claim that the red hair came from her daddy's side, not from the Hyman side. And it was then we all discovered there was a grandmother way back on my husband's side who had blondish red hair. So we figured that it was a natural occurrence. Susan was a active baby and didn't sleep as well as Judy had, and she was very, very needed a lot of attention. And but Judy was kind and sweet and played with her little baby sister. Susan, Judy kept the nursery was Judy's, but when the baby arrived, we moved Judy into another room that had twin beds, and so Susan was in the nursery, and she was an active child, and but as soon as she was able to talk a little, walk and play, they became playmates. But Judy was still the verbal one, and told all the stories before Susan could get them told. And she was learning to do all the things that Judy was trying to teach her. We were all involved with the 2 children at that point, and it was a busy household, a very, very busy household. Susan was always interested in pretty. It's so pretty. It's so pretty, and her clothes. I had things that were mostly that dressed alike, and she had the blue, and so Judy had the pink. The redhead had the blue, and Judy was in pink. And Susan was always interested in more hair bows, and she wanted to tie hair bows on Judy's braids. By that time, she had little braided hair. Susan had the curly hair, very beautiful, silky red hair. And She was interested in dolls also, but she was also athletic to a degree. Out in the yard, she could manage the swings and the slide and all of the equipment. And she would like to be in the kitchen too. And at one time, she and her little cousin Janet, who was then just close to the same age, and they would play together in the kitchen, and they got into all kinds of things, trying to cook and bake and do things and make a mess in the kitchen, but they were having fun all the time, and it was a cute period of time, and as I say, a very active household. My third daughter, Barbara, was born in Atlantic City when my husband was stationed in Atlantic City during the Second World War. This was 1945, and at that time, many of the hotels in Atlantic City were converted into hospitals for the returning, injured, crippled, horrible sights of the returned veterans. And my husband was in charge of the ear, nose, and throat department in the one hospital. And we traveled to Atlantic City, the children and I, overnight to join my husband. This was the two children before Barbara was born. And the experience of getting to Atlantic City, the train broke down in the middle of the night, and I had to get the two children up and out of the train, and all kinds of problems getting to Atlantic City. And then when we arrived in Atlantic City, we were in some kind of a little hotel where they had place for the officers' families, and we had to look for an apartment, our house, to stay, because I was pregnant and going to have this baby shortly. And that was a very, very big occasion, or a big problem to find housing. And we finally did find a house way beyond Atlantic City on the outskirts. When I went to the obstetrician to have a first visit with him, he suggested that I not go to the private hospital, as I thought I would, but to go to the Army hospital, because there was some kind of an epidemic in the private hospital, and I would be safer in the Army hospital. So I was when I went into labor, I went to the Army hospital, and I was put in a room with 3 or 4 other women who were in labor. And I was told the WACs were taken, women called WACs, who were they weren't nurses, but they were medical people, trained to some extent. And I was in serious labor pains, and a woman, one of the WACs, handed me 2 ropes, and she tied them on the foot of the bed, and she said, when you have a pain, just pull on these ropes. So you could imagine. It was a horror story. And until I screamed loud enough that my husband heard me in his department, he came and took me out of that bed and put me into the labor room, into the delivery room, and he got a obstetrician somewhere, and they delivered the child, Barbara. And so she was Barbara Ellen, and born in 1945 on August the 22nd. And it was an experience. And living in Atlantic City in that area during that time was an experience too. It was a year of of the Miss America pageant, and I'm trying to think of the outstanding, beautiful woman who became, young woman who became Miss America that year. But it was an interesting time, and we walked on the boardwalk with the children, and saw all these returned injured people. One soldier walking with crutches and canes and pushing another one in a wheelchair. It was all of these injured people. It was an experience going through that. That was 1945. Barbara was a sweet, very lovable, sweet little girl, and she was adored by her older sisters. The two of the older ones would very often get into little arguments, little scraps, little fights, and they would want the same toy, or they would want that doll is mine, or that toy is mine, you've got mine. And Barbara would interfere. When she was old enough to talk, she would interrupt the two of them, go into the middle of them, and try to separate them. And she'd say, "Don't fight, don't fight. No, no fighting. Here, take mine, take mine." She was always a peacemaker and loving, wonderful child, and she's still that way today.